Hey guys, and welcome to week 2 of your tutorials for the Create Yourself class. I hope that you enjoyed last week's lesson on how to use brushes. Just starting out with brushes, we're going to keep using them, and pretty soon I'm going to show you how to really do some really creative and cool things using brushes. And I want to keep things a little bit easier as we move into the rest of the course. As we go, we're going to learn more about compositing and about really creating multi-layered images. It's going to take a few hours maybe for you to create, but I want to start with the basics. And one of the things I get asked a lot about my photography is how to do coloring, and I know that was something that you guys asked as well in your surveys that you filled out, is that you wanted to learn a little bit more about coloring, about how to edit colors, and how to get to the colors that you're looking for. And so what I want to do is to show you 4 different ways that I use color, or how I approach color in my images. So I've got 4 images here, and I want to just show you 4 very different ways that you can look at adjusting the colors in your images. So for the first one, this is just a raw file, and what we're going to use to edit the colors in this image is a gradient map. So a gradient map is a way for you to adjust the colors of the shadows and the highlights of your image. So what we're going to do to apply our gradient map is you can either go down here to your little half circle at the bottom, and then it's going to be the second one from the bottom, or you can go up into layer, new adjustment layer, and it'll be down here, gradient map. So when you click on gradient map, it's going to give you this black and white gray scaled slider bar. So what you want to do is you want to click on that little bar there, and it's going to show you all of your presets. So this is sort of like last week when we were playing with our brushes. This is going to give you your presets of the built-in gradient maps that Photoshop gives you. So you are given sort of this default set, and if you go up here to your gear, down here you'll see that you have all these other tabs that you can click on. So there's pastels, there's some special effects, there's color harmonies, there's photographic toning. They all contain different samples. So if we click on this one that says color harmonies 1, it'll ask us if we want to replace the ones that are already listed with that selection. I'm just going to click append, which just adds them. And we see this nice collection here. So if we click on one of these, doesn't really matter which one, you'll see that it gives you this really intense effect, and that's obviously not what we're going for. So if we click through, you can see that there's lots of different colors. They're very intense. It's like super saturated and really contrasted. That's not what we're looking for, but it's going to help us get there. So when we go up here into our opacity, we can lower that down to maybe 25-26%, and you can see that it's actually impacting the image at a much more pleasing level. So if we go up and start playing around with our different gradient maps, you can see that it is starting to impact the shadows and the highlights of our image, just not as intense as it was before. So if we click on this one, you'll see that down here there's a purple one and an orange one. The purple one is going to add that purple color to your shadows. This left-hand side is your shadows. The right-hand side is your highlight, so it's going to add in that orange color into all the highlights or the lightest parts of your image. So down at the bottom here, if you click down here onto your color picker, you can choose any color that you want your shadows to be adjusted to. So you can pick which colors you want to really fit the rest of your image. So you can go down to, let's say we want to add in some more dark green to this image, so you can click down there. In our highlights, again, you can add whichever color you want, so you can add in more green to those highlights, more orange. Remembering that in this picture, the highlights are really going to be where the skin tone is, so you want to make sure that you're protecting the quality of the skin tone. You don't want it to be super high green, because it's going to add that green color to your skin tone. So I'm going to stay somewhere close into that peachy tone. If we click OK, you can see if we click off and on that it is adding a nice subtle level of that gradient map. So that's one way that we can adjust that. You can also use gradient maps to convert your images to black and white. So like we did here, we just added a new gradient map and the default is this black and white. You can see that it does give you that really strong contrast of black and white. You can slide these sliders down to adjust where your shadows and where your highlights are going to end up. And you can also add steps. And the steps are going to be sort of giving you the opportunity to add other colors or other shades into that image. So what it's doing is it's saying anything from this point on is going to start going down to black. So we start adding these steps, it's almost like it's adding in these little steps of color. And again, it might look totally ridiculous and totally weird right now, but if we lower our opacity, it is going to start to allow us to adjust our colors in an interesting way. I always say in Photoshop that it's better to do small steps over and over again than one big step and do it wrong. And so that's what kind of using gradient maps to adjust your colors is adjusting the colors in small steps. So say we want to use this kind of, let's say purple to orange, and we want to change this so that it's nice and low. We click OK. We're going to lower the opacity. We can add another gradient map and we can do the same thing, this time with a different preset. So if we go into our gear and we say let's go to photographic toning, it's going to give us this nice selection. We can click on one of these images, sort of like just scrolling through different filters. We can click OK and we can adjust the opacity of that layer as well to play with the color tones of our image. You can always go in and change the colors of your little steps or your markers. Just keeping in mind where they sit on that timeline is going to affect the highlights or the shadows. So as we move to the right, highlights; as we move to the left, shadows. So it is a way for you to add some color into those shadows if you wanted to. So if we deselect those two, you can see that we've added in some nice kind of film effect or nice faded effect into that image. It might not work for all of your images, but it doesn't hurt to just practice and play with adding gradient maps to your image. The second one, and this is the coloring style that I use the most, is selective coloring. So this is an image that I've created. I've photoshopped it all together. This is from last year, and I have not done any coloring to it. So this is sort of not straight out of camera, obviously, because I don't have a light bulb for a heart, but it's not color adjusted. So this is the colors that came out of the files. But it's not really what I'm looking for in terms of the image. What I want to do is I want to start to individually color the images. So I'm going to go down here to my gear, and right at the bottom is selective color. Again, you can also go up to image, or sorry, you can go up to layer, new adjustment layer, down here selective color. So we click OK, and it's going to give us the selective color layer on top. What selective color allows you to do is it allows you to manipulate the individual color channels or color tones of your image. And this is really useful for really pinpointing where you want your colors to be. Down here it'll say relative or absolute. Relative is going to say the colors that are relative to the tones listed up above. Absolute is going to be those definitive colors. So it's going to really pinpoint the colors that you're working with. If we click on this tab that says colors, you'll see that it goes from reds, yellows, greens, cyans, blues, magentas, whites, neutrals, and blacks. That means that you can adjust each of those individual color channels or tones in selective color. So if we go down to blacks, this is usually where I start. At the very bottom, it says black. If we slide this to the left, it's going to add white to that black. It's going to bring up the blacks. If we slide it to the right, it's going to bring down those blacks. It's going to add some darkness or some contrast to those blacks. I typically always slide it to the right, maybe 10, 15%. If we move up to where it says yellow, keeping in mind that we're adjusting the blacks or the shadows, if we drag it this way, it's going to do the opposite of adding yellow. It's going minus 100%. So it's going to add blue, not yellow. So it's remembering your little color chart. If you've ever taken an art class or a painting class, you have your color wheel, the opposite color. So the opposite of yellow is going to be this blue color. So if we slide it this way, it's going to add some yellow into those shadows. So you can see it's sort of adding those yellows into that, into the shadows of our image. Same with our magenta tone. The opposite of that magenta is going to be this green, but if we slide it to the right, it's going to add that magenta, that warm color tone into that image. You can see as I'm sliding that it's adding that warm color tone to that image. In the top, cyan, if we slide it that way, it's going to be this kind of red magenta color. If we slide it to the right, it's going to add that blue sort of teal cyan color. We can do the same thing with our neutrals. This is going to be much more dramatic because most of the image is made up of neutrals. So if we slide this to the right, it's really going to blast out the highlights or the neutrals of our image. If we drag it to the right, it's going to really darken the whole image. I don't tend to spend a lot of time adjusting the neutrals of the image because I do find that the adjustments tend to be a lot harsher because you are impacting so much more of the image. So as I slide these, you can see adding yellow, taking away yellow, adding magenta, taking away magenta, adding cyan, taking away cyan. I'm going to keep those all at 0 because I don't tend to play with those ones. Whites, again, we can slide those around and it's going to either take away or add colors to your whites or your highlights. Again, I don't tend to do too much playing around with the whites in selective color. I really just use it for the blacks and then the individual color channels. So I'm going to start up here with yellows. So yellows is going to actually be where the grass sits. So grass tends to fall inside the yellow color channel. Even though it looks green, it's mostly made up of different yellow tones. So if I slide the black slider, you'll see that if I slide it to the right, it's really adding some light to the yellow tones, which is where my skin is, which is where the light bulb is, which is where the grass is. If I slide it to the right, it's going to really make those yellow tones a lot darker. If I take the yellow slider and I slide it all the way to the left, you can see that it's changed the whole color tone of the image. It's made it much more purple, it's made it cooler, it's taken away the yellow in the grass and turned it into blue. If I slide it to the right, it's going to really increase that yellow in the grass and in my skin. For this image, I want to keep it a little bit more on the cooler side, so I'm going to start taking away some of that color. So I'm going to leave it at 50%, minus 50%. If we play with the magenta tones, you can see it does the same thing. It adds some of that green back into the grass and into my skin. If we slide it towards magenta, it's really going to make it warmer, and it's going to add in that magenta into those yellow tones. So I'm going to keep it sort of neutral. I'm going to just leave it at minus 7. If we do the same thing up here, you can see that it's really impacting the color tones of that image, of the yellow tones. We can do the same thing with our reds. We can increase, keeping in mind that our skin tone in this image is going to be where the red is. We can adjust the yellow tones. I might want to add in a little bit more yellow because I took some away. Keeping in mind that as I adjust these, you can see the difference in lips and in fingers. Somewhere there's lots of that red color tone. And really that's probably going to be where the majority of this image lies. You can see that if we slide these around, it's not really doing much to the image because there's really no magenta in that image. If we slide this around, there might be a little bit of blue. Doesn't look like it. There might be a little bit of cyan from my shirt, but again, it doesn't look like that's really impacting anything either. So for the most part, this image consists of red, yellows, and blacks. If we click off and on our selective color, you can see how much difference that made to our image. It really just kind of makes the whole image pop. It really helped make the figure pop out from the background. It really helps to neutralize some of the intense yellows and greens in that image and really helps to add the effect of making the background almost fade off into the distance instead of being kind of right there with the rest of the image. So selective coloring is one thing that I do in almost all of my images. Almost all of my images are adjusted using selective coloring, because I really feel like it helps me to control the different color channels of our image. If we go back to that first image that we played with and we do a quick little selective color, you can guess that a lot of the image is probably going to lie in the yellows. So if we drag that down, you can already see it's taken the yellows out of the sort of leaves in the background. We can really start to play with the color tones of our image, and it can do a lot in such a short amount of time. So if we want to add in or play around with some of these greens, just getting random messages. And then maybe a little bit of the reds as well. Obviously not too much, but you can see that the selective color channel again helped us to really adjust the color tones of our image. The third one that I'm going to show you is using this image. So again, it's finished, it's been edited, it's been composited, but I haven't done any color adjustments. The colors are exactly as they were shot, but it's not quite where I want it to be. One technique that I learned a few years ago in adjusting color tones is playing around with our curves levels. I'm having a bit of a tongue twister. So in our curves levels, we can adjust the lights and the darks of our image. So going up and going down. And you can see that it's adjusting just the lights and the darks, not really the colors, but the actual shadows and highlights. This right side where the peak is saying that there's a lot of highlights in our image, and that's going to be where if we drag it up, it's going to impact the highlights, and on the left side is our shadows, our lowlights. So we can play around with the sort of highs and lows of our image, but we can also play around with the color channels of our image. So I'm going to go down to red. So this is going to impact only the red tones of our image. So if I drag this line up, it's going to really add in that red to our image. Again, thinking of our color wheel and the opposites, if we pull it down, it's going to start adding more of a greeny cyan color. We obviously don't want that. We obviously don't want that. We want a nice healthy balance. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of red into the highlights. So kind of picking this little point here and dragging it up so that it hits the highlight where that peak is. I'm going to go down here on the left and I'm going to drag this little slider down a little bit. And that's going to add in that cyan color to the shadows, much like our gradient map. And then this little bit on the left hand side, I'm just going to drag that up so that it kind of sits a bit higher on that level. Now we're going to go down to green. We're going to do the same thing. If we slide that whole thing up, it's going to add green. If we slide that down, it's going to add this crazy pink neon color. We don't want either of those, but we want to adjust the color tone. So if we slide this down, it's going to add in that pink tone just a little bit into our shadows. If we slide this up, we're going to add in some of that green, just every little bit slightly in there, and I'm going to just drag that up as well. And then our last one is blue. So again, if we add that, it's going to add a lot of blue. What's the opposite of this blue on our wheel is kind of this yellowy color. So again, I want to add some blue into the shadow, so I'm going to pull this down, and I'm going to pull this up towards the top, and I'm going to just slide that left-hand slide, that little point there, up a little bit. So what you can see now is if we turn this on and off, we've really added some warmth to the image by adding those reds. We've added some nice balance into the shadows, and we've really added some nice contrast. And that's just from playing with the curves channels. That's not adding any colors aside from our curves. We can still adjust our whites and our darks. So if we go up to where it says RGB, we can play around with our contrast. So we can pull this down on the left, we can pull this up on the right, and then it looks like a nice subtle S curve, and we can have that down here on the left, just like that. So our last method that we're going to use, I'm going to use this image. Again, it's been edited, it's been composited, but we haven't done any coloring to it. And this is a technique that I learned a few years ago, and I've used it in quite a few of my images. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add a series of color layers. So down here on our left, or sorry, on our bottom, we can go all the way up to the top where it says solid color. What we want to do is we want to add 3 different color panels to our image. So the first one is going to be a nice warm kind of beigey yellow. So it's kind of in between halfway through our whites to our yellows, and it's beige. And we are going to, up here where it says normal, that's our blending mode, we're going to go down to multiply. So you can see that it's added yellow into that image. It's kind of washed the whole image with yellow. It really hits the white spaces of our image. We don't want to have that at 100%, so we're going to drag it down sort of in between 30 and 40. We're going to do that again, so our half circle going up to solid color. This time we're going to go into the blues, and we're going to go down into a navy blue. For this blending mode, we're going to go into screen. And again, we're going to lower that opacity, this time maybe 50%. So if we take those off, you can see that our adjustments again are nice and subtle, but it is impacting how the rest of that image looks. The last image, or the last layer that we're going to do, so solid color, we're going to pick a nice pink color, and we're going to go into soft light, and we're going to really lower the opacity of that one down. So what we've done now is we've added almost a vintage kind of wash to the image. So if we take those off, it's more subtle and it's not as drastic as Selective Color or our Color Curves channels, but it is a way to add a little bit of a vintage wash over the image, and I do tend to add that into all of my images. You can adjust the colors to fit the different color tones in your image, so maybe you want to add a little bit more orange into this one because there's a lot of orange from the sand. Maybe instead of this blue, you want it to be purple. And if you drag it up so it's a bit lighter, then it'll kind of show a little bit more into your image. And it does tend to neutralize some of the darks. You can see the difference here. So that's 4 ways that you can adjust the color tones in your image. So we've used our solid colors, so we've added these 3 sort of solid color tones. We've used our color channels, and this is using curves. We've used our selective color, and we've used our gradient maps. You don't have to use all of those different techniques in the same image, but I do find it's useful to know how to use all those different techniques and apply them into your images. Some of these images I've used curves and selective color, some of them are just selective color, some of them are just curves. It's worth just practicing and playing around in your images to figure out which ones that you like most. And it's also important to know which color tones that you want your images to look like. Do you want them to be warm? Do you want them to be cold? Do you want them to have a washed out effect? Do you want them to have high contrast? So you just have to figure out which ones you're looking for, and then you can adjust your color curves and your color channels to fit the style of image that you're looking for. So I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope that you practice and play around with your color curves. You will get some actions that will give you some of the effects that I've done here, and you can run those through your images. If you're not sure how to load an action, it's just like a brush. So over here you'll have actions, or you can go up into your File, Actions menu. On your little list here, Load Actions. You'll get an action. Let's just say we'll download this one. it'll show up here on the bottom, and then all you have to do is press play. So when you get your action, you can press play and it'll adjust that image for you. You'll be able to play with the color curves action, you'll be able to play with the gradient map action, and you'll be able to play with the selective color action and adjust them to fit each individual image that you have. If you have any questions, please let me know, and I can't wait to see what you guys create this week.